Hi everyone, my name's Rob and I'm a photographer from Cambridgeshire. I've been a photographer for the best part of 10 years, and through that time I've focused mainly on aviation, but I've also spent time doing landscapes, travel and various other different bits along the way. Recently, lots of people have asked me about my editing process and my photography processes in general, so I thought I'd share some of my methods and the madness behind them. For my first video, I wanted to do a brief rundown of my editing process from start to finish, to give you an idea of how I do things. So let's start by taking this raw image and turning it into this final image. So let's get underway. I'm going to start by, as I always do, going to enable my profile corrections and remove any chromatic aberration, just to get my lens corrected and remove any colour fringing. And then what we'll start is we'll work our way down from exposure all the way down to the bottom. In terms of colour profile, I leave it Adobe Colour, and when it comes to temperature, I'll come back to that a little bit later when we've got the picture almost where we want it. So we've got a fairly good exposure. I'm watching at the histogram here, seeing where that is. You'd like to keep that in the middle with no major peaks. So what we're going to do with this one, it's fairly well balanced with the exposure. So we're going to start with the contrast. I'm just going to push that up. We'll grab as far as 20 with this one. Now we want to bring a few highlights back. Probably not that many, so we'll come back down. And now what is quite a pale picture, so we want to bring some of the blacks back in here, I think. Just to make it pop a little bit. Maybe just to bring the background out a little bit, we'll add a little bit of dehaze. I think it's still a relatively flat photo, this one, so let's go and add a little bit of vibrance in, just to make the colours pop just a little bit. As you can see, it's got slightly darker as we've done those changes, so what we're going to do is we're going to move the exposure back up, just to bring it back to where it was, and you'll see that what I do is over the course of this editing process, I'll push and pull the exposure tab. Now what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to bring those greens in a little bit more. So we're going to look at the colour saturation. We'll just push the greens up a little bit. But equally, we don't want them to be too bright, so I think what we'll do is we'll bring the luminance down just a little bit. Now what I don't like to do with a picture of an aeroplane is I don't like to sharpen the whole image. So what I'll do is I'll use the fantastic masking tool that Lightroom have now got. And what we'll do is we'll select subject, and that should, in theory, just pick out all of the aeroplane. As you can see, it's done a fairly good job. There's a few bits that it's missed out, but that's fine. We can analyse that as we go along. So what we're going to do is we've got a bit on the tail here that we're just going to touch. Add a brush tool. Now obviously I'm going to do this fairly quickly, but obviously the more time you spend on it, the better the mask is going to be. So let's just add to this as well. If when you're using the brush tool, if you look at this little auto mask tab here, if you keep that clicked, what it should do is it should do a very good job of keeping between the lines where the colours contrast against each other, like that. Obviously it's not perfect, you can overblow, but then we can go back and we can brush those edges out. As I say, not the perfect mask, but you know, the more time you spend on it, the better it's going to be. So now we've got that mask selected, what we're going to do is we're going to make the aeroplane punch a little bit more. So I'm going to start by pushing the texture up. I'm not a huge fan of using the sharpening tool, if I'm honest. I like to get I used to like it through texture. I just feel it's got a more natural feel about it, and it's a little bit less grainy. So now you can see it's brought it out a little bit, but I think what we want to do is we want to add a little bit of clarity in here, just to make the body of the plane just punch a little bit. So we'll go maybe 20. That's starting to look quite nice. I think obviously on the edges here, the highlights are a little bit blown. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring the highlights back on the plane just a little bit more. There we go, just a little touch. Now as you can see, we've got a little bit darker again, so I'm just going to lift the exposure just a touch. Now in terms of the white balance, this is fairly accurate to what it was during the day. The plane is a little bit blue, and everything about in the background is a little bit bluer than I'd like it to be. So what we're going to do is we're just going to lift that just a little bit, just to take a little bit of the blues out, just a touch. You don't have to. One thing you'll see how I'm editing, I'm not making huge changes, I'm only making small subtle changes. You don't have to go over the top on these things unless you're looking to try and make a statement or do something a bit more artistic. So I think what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to adjust the crop a little bit more. I'm going to keep it, I think, at the 3:2 ratio because I want to keep the plane front and center, but I want to keep the background in it so that you can see that we're flying through the hills here. So what I've done here is I've tried to work with the rule of thirds, whereby I've kept the rear of the aircraft on 1/3 and the front of the aircraft on another third. Doesn't necessarily have to be like that. Quite often what I like to do, one of my key things about cropping my pictures, I like the airplane to have somewhere to fly into. So for example, if we cropped it right down like that, it just feels a bit cramped, a bit claustrophobic. So I like to give it space, just so it looks like it's coming from somewhere and it's going somewhere, because essentially all airplanes are coming from somewhere and going somewhere else. The background is quite blurred, obviously, because we've been flying through, but the airplane's punching a bit. But what I want to do now, I think I want to make a bit more of a focus on the airplane itself. So I think in this instance, we're going to try and I want to try and darken the background out a little bit more. So I think with this, we could use a vignette, which we could bring in, which will bring in the edges and just sort of round it off a bit and bring the focus in. But I'm not a huge fan of using the vignettes. I always feel they're a bit too rigid. So what I like to do is I like to use a radial gradient filter. And then what I'll do here is I'll click the invert tool. So when I go and select the mask, it will select everything other than what I'm selecting. And then what this will do is this will gradient out. So it'll be more effect at the edges than there are as we get closer in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring that exposure down. And we're getting the same sort of effect that you'd get from a vignette. But obviously with this, I can move it around a bit more and I can be a bit more precise about where I want to put it. I like that. So it's a fairly simple edit, and as you can see, we've gone from here to here. I've not done a lot. All I've done to this is just to try and bring it out a little bit more, just to make it punch a little bit more, just to make it more in your face. There are, of course, other ways you could edit this photo. This is what I've decided to do on this one. But yeah, there we are, edit complete. So I hope that was useful and you got some good tips from it. If you want to see more pictures like that, head over to Rob Sluice Photography on Instagram. Equally, you can find my aviation stuff, RS7 Aviation on Instagram. I'll put links in the description below. If you want to see more videos like this, drop me a like, drop me a comment. If you feel like it, subscribe, and I'll see what else I can do with this channel. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again.